Beatles, widows, boys, girls, how are we all doing? Today, I'm going to be talking to you about Stephen King horror movies. So, I am a huge Stephen King fan. I think we've got every book up until very, very recent releases. I'm not even sure what recent releases there are, but I love Stephen King books. They are probably the scariest books that I've ever read, and I started reading them quite young. In fact, the first book that I read is my number one movie as well, because both the book and the movie scared me so bad. I even reread the book as an adult and it still scared me. Stephen King just does something cerebral to me. He triggers my imagination. Fantastic. So, in this top 10 ranking of Stephen King horror movies, I am not going to be including any of the miniseries or any of the TV movies. Even though I enjoy some of them, they're not in this list. So the original It TV miniseries, that won't be included. The Shining TV miniseries that I really enjoyed, that won't be included. Salem's Lot, the original, because it was a two-part TV series, that won't be included. And also I'm not going to be including things like Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile, Stand By Me, because while they are fantastic movies, Shawshank Redemption being one of my favourite all-time movies, they're not horror movies. This is just about horror. Now, this is my list. My list would be different to yours. Some people are going to say that my number one movie they don't like for reasons that I can see. It's just my thoughts. So in at number 10 is the most recent Stephen King adaptation, and that is Salem's Lot from 2024. I had zero expectations for this movie, and I was more than pleasantly surprised by it. This movie is written and directed by Gary Doberman, and it stars Lewis Pullman, Mackenzie Lee, Alfre Woodward, John Benjamin Hickley, Bill Camp, Jordan Preston Carter, Nicholas Cravetti, Spencer Treat Clark, William Sadler, and I have just had to read them because there's a lot. So we follow a writer, Ben Mears. Now, a lot of these protagonists in Stephen King movies are writers because Stephen King is obviously a writer. And he returns to his hometown of Jerusalem's Lot, and Ben Mears has this sort of secretive, dark past involving the town. And whilst he's there to write a book and to confront his past, whilst he is sort of uncovering his own past, he discovers that somebody is living in somewhere called the Marsden House, somewhere that scared him as a child. And we discover that the new owner, Kurt Barlow, is in fact a vampire that is feeding on the town and turning the town into an undead horde. But obviously Kurt has limitations being a vampire with daylight, so he has somebody that helps him in the day. Really creepy Richard Straker, who kind of does his bidding and manipulates a lot of the town folk as well. So Ben, with the help of some of the local townspeople that actually believe him, decide they fight back, they try to save the town, and yeah, it doesn't go so well for most of the people. I really enjoy both TV versions of this. There's a Rob Lowe sort of TV movie that I found on DVD, never saw it on the TV, and it's quite enjoyable. And there's obviously the original that everybody knows, the scratching outside the window that terrified everyone, terrified me. Both are really good in their own way, but they're not movies. This is a movie, and what this movie does is it changes enough to keep me interested. There's a scene involving sort of the chase of darkness falling through a drive-in theatre or drive-in cinema, and as the lights approaching, this danger comes out. And I'm trying not to spoil any of these movies really, because some people may not have seen all of them. But it's a fantastic, really suspenseful scene. The cast is very, very enjoyable in this. I didn't think this movie would work because the story is so rich and so deep, and then to try and pack it into a movie as opposed to a TV show, I was like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. And this movie is very fast-paced, and it can feel quite disjointed because of how fast-paced it is, how fast the pace is if you know the story well. But as a modern version, as a vampire, as a modern movie, as a new take with new effects, this thing absolutely rocks. I enjoyed this film. There's nothing on this film that I dislike, by the way. So in at number 9 is The Mist 2007. Now, some people are not going to put this movie in their list because they hate the ending. I know the ending detracts away from the original ending, but it was such a gut punch ending. It's horrific. And I love the movie for it. I like this ending. Well, I don't like it. I hate this ending, but in a good way. So this is written, directed, and produced by Frank Darabont, who you will know from The Walking Dead. A very underrated person. I mean, a very underrated writer and director. I mean, he did The Shawshank Redemption, and he seems to get very little recognition. And you'll recognise a few of the actors in this from The Walking Dead as well. But heading the cast, we have got Thomas Jane, aka The Punisher. We've got Marcia Gray Harden, Laurie Holden, who was also in The Walking Dead, Toby Jones, who is a fantastic British actor, Melissa McBride, who was also in The Walking Dead. You'll see a few faces from The Walking Dead creep up in this film. The guy that plays Dale is in there. And the plot basically follows a group of people, a group of town folk from Bridgeton in Maine, that are basically stuck in a superstore. There's a mist approaching, and there are Lovecraftian-style creatures trying to get in to kill them. But the creatures outside are not the only danger, because the mist and the creatures spread this paranoia and this fear, and then you get a religious person sort of start kicking off, trying to take control, and it all becomes like this twisted. You can't trust anyone, but you can't trust outside, and eventually certain people start getting picked off. A lot of tension, a lot of drama. The creature effects are really good for what I think was a low-budget movie, really. And that ending is such a gut punch. You have to watch it if you haven't seen it. It is heartbreaking. In number 8, we have The Dark Half from 1993. I remember watching this movie as a kid. So what was I, 12 when this came out? And at 12 years old, I saw the twin inside the head, and I was just, nah, I can't watch this. Way too scary. Even the birds in this movie are creepy. Now, this movie hasn't aged great, but for nostalgia reasons, and this being a movie that actually scared me, I love this thing. The Dark Half is actually written and directed by George Romero and features Timothy Hutton as both Thad Beaumont and his alter ego, or his pseudonym for writing, George Stark, but George Stark comes to life. So Thad wants to step away from these books that he's writing under this pseudonym. So he holds a mock funeral for his pseudonym, and then murders start happening. And these murders are clearly the work of his alter ego come to life. The murders in the movie actually follow the murders that are in these books that he's written, and this is how he pieces together the clues, how the audience pieces together the clues. We also get Sheriff Alan Panghorn in this movie, and he's a character that pops up in numerous movies, some movies and books. Now, it's not on this list. He's also in Needless Things, but with a different actor. Michael Rooker plays him in this. I love Michael Rooker. This movie is, in places, a little bit cheesy, a little bit overacted, but I have so much fun with it. And there is a lot of horror elements to it. There's sort of detective moments to it, and then the end of the movie it's actually quite insane and quite tense. Love this thing. At number 7, we've got Christine from 1983. This was co-scored and directed by John Carpenter. John Carpenter, a legend in horror. We all know his movies. This movie stars Keith Gordon and John Stockwell, and we follow the main character of Arnie Cunningham. He's sort of this outcast. He's not very popular, and he gets this 1958 Plymouth Fury named Christine. And he sort of does the car up, then the car starts to do things, and you're like, is the car killing people, or is it him? Because he starts to change along with the car. The car seemingly can heal itself from damage. He starts to turn into this sort of greaser character, full of confidence, and he's becoming more of a dick as the movie goes along. This thing is so brilliantly shot. There's these weird things where you're like, the car is breathing, or there's even a scene where the car is almost sexualized. It'll make no sense without you watching it. But this is a very fun movie. There's absolute carnage in this movie as well. I believe it's another low-budget production, but John Carpenter with a low budget, we all know, can create utter magic. Really, really enjoy this movie. You need to it's Definitely one to check out if you haven't seen it. Number 6 from 1990, Misery. Whew, what an intense film. Stars Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes and James Caan as Paul Sheldon, who is a writer who has a car accident and he is rescued, or seemingly rescued, by Annie Wilkes. He's taken to Annie's home and Annie then cares for him. But there's a problem. Annie Wilkes is a super fan and she ain't all there. And what happens next is James Caan is obviously really badly injured. He's got broken legs and he's trying to heal, but he starts to piece together that Annie is very, very unhinged. So this is about James Caan trying to appease her so she stops going crazy whilst trying to plan his escape. And it leads to a scene involving a block of wood and a sledgehammer. And no matter how many times I have watched that scene, I cringe. It's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. James Caan is brilliant in this. He's kind of this sarcastic, confident man who's slowly getting beaten down by pretending to be nice to this absolute lunatic. This is the best role Kathy Bates has ever played. She's very good in Dolores Claiborne as well, which hasn't made it to this list, but that's another movie worth checking out. Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes is next level acting in this. She goes from almost sickly sweet to scary psychotic in a heartbeat. It is absolutely incredible the range she shows in this movie. And it's often quite funny because she tries not to swear, but then and the things she says not to swear are even funnier than if she did swear. But when she loses it in this movie, you're like, holy shit. I'm a 43-year-old guy that knows how to look after myself. I worked security and I was a doorman, or in the US it'd be called a bouncer for years, and I'm like, I wouldn't fuck with Annie. She's gonna kill me. Absolutely adore this movie. Please check it out if you haven't. Very, very good. Next up is 1982's Creepshow. So this is a horror comedy anthology, and it's directed by George A. Romero, and it's written by Stephen King. Obviously, it also stars in one of the episodes of the anthology. Now, you will recognise a lot of the cast in this. Ted Danson is in it. Leslie Nielsen is in there. This is 80s cheese, but for a horror comedy, it has such scary elements. So we've got 5 stories. We've got Father's Day that revolves around I Want My Cake. The creature effects on this, the zombie effects on I Want My Cake, dude, absolutely fantastic. The weird lighting and the sort of the red lights, the blue lights, and then these weird shots and the deaths. A fantastic first part to this anthology. Really, really cool. Loved the episode as a kid. The I Want My Cake guy terrified me. I really struggled to get through this, but me and my uncle used to watch it almost every Saturday because of how nuts this film was. We get Something to Tide You Over, which is Leslie Nielsen taking revenge on his cheating wife, who's cheating with Ted Danson, and it's comedic, and then the way that Leslie Nielsen gets his revenge is brutal. But then after he gets his revenge, these zombies come back, but they're soaking wet, dripping with seaweed and the makeup. As a kid, I had nightmares about these two. Horrible, horrible to look at. Another cool addition to this. And then you got the one that scared everyone. Everyone I know of my age that watched Creepshow was terrified of the crate. Everybody was terrified of the crate and what was in the crate, and then when it came out and what it did to people. It's a horror masterclass in a short movie. Even as an adult, it's very, very creepy. There's one part of this anthology I'm not too fussed on, and it's the one with the insects or the cockroaches. It's a little bit too weird for me, but I think it's based on a short story by Stephen King, as a few of these. And then we get we also get the lonesome death of, is his name Joey? Joey Verrill, in which Stephen King plays the lead. and this is the most comedic of the episodes, where a meteor crashes and Stephen King's character Joey touches the meteor, burns his finger, licks his fingers, and he's like, ooh, meteor shit. And then everything he touches starts growing this green moss, leading to him becoming this moss-like creature. And then there's this it's technically a very tragic ending, but as a kid I remember laughing my ass off. I'm not going to say what it is because YouTube won't like it, but it's it was the effect of what happened that was more funny. But go and check it out. The Creepshow is fantastic, but it also introduces us to the Creep. He's also in part two. Part two isn't as strong as this. There's a second movie. The second movie, Creepshow 2, isn't anywhere near as strong. Stephen King had very little to do with it. But you get the Creep, and in this we follow sort of what bridges the stories is this kid reading Creepshow horror comics. And then we follow his dad, who's kind of abusive to him, really. Doesn't like his kid reading comics, but this kid's reading comics and sees the Creep. It goes between animated footage to movie footage. Such a great time with this anthology. I love it. In at number 4, and I'm cheating here because I'm going to include parts 1 and 2, or chapter 1 and 2, it is It, from 2017 and 2019. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the second part, chapter 2. I do. I'm one of the rare people that just adores both of these movies. And I know, you're allowed your opinion on them. I'm not somebody that loves the original miniseries. I love Tim Curry as Pennywise, but the child acting in the original one, it's a bit ropey in places. The adult portion is such a drag. Just terrible, terrible acting. Something that I can't enjoy. And it's a shame because Tim Curry's Pennywise is phenomenal. But I don't want that to take that away from Bill Skarsgård Pennywise. I hear the calls of he sounds like Scooby-Doo in places. Yes, there's an over-reliance on CGI, but look at the original story. There's no way you can do this on film without CGI. They tried to make this more scary than the original, and I think it works. So we follow the Losers Club, 7 outcasts, some misfits that sort of get together. They're battling against this interdimensional space clown demon thing that's older than time. They're battling against bullies. They're battling against their parents being like really shut off to them and not paying any attention to them, or being downright evil to them. And the first part follows them as kids. Finn Wolfhard is a standout in this. There are scenes like with poor little Georgie. I've got Georgie's boat up there. I've got Pennywise figures up there. And then we get the adult section, which upon a rewatch is far more emotional than I remember. There's this subplot involving Ben Hader's character, who's also Finn Wolfhard, as an older character, and him having a secret from everyone. It's quite obvious what the secret is, but they never quite... But they don't bash you around the head with it. It's very well done. James McAvoy is spectacular in this. There's a Stephen King cameo, which is really funny. And in the second part of this, like in the original series, you always thought that Pennywise was quite constant, whereas in this, it seems that Pennywise is even stronger the second time round when the adults come back to fight him, and he's almost luring them in. Just a really, really cool move. 2 really, really cool movies that I can watch back to back. Enjoy them. In fact, I watched them last week. I'm not going to get too much into why it's so different from the books, because the book, there are certain sections of the book that you could never put to film. Stephen King himself regrets certain sections of the book. But then there's also how crazy the end of the book went, and if they try to put that into film, it'll never work. The most disappointing thing is the unoriginality of Pennywise's final form, because they can't do what they did in the book. So they do what they did in the TV miniseries. It's a spider. And I'm like, I hope they were going to try something different, and they didn't. But I adore these movies. I know they've got I know the second part has its haters. I'm not one of them. I really enjoyed it. This may be a bit controversial, I guess, because it'll definitely be number 1 of most people's lists. But number 3 for me is 1980's The Shining, written and produced by Stanley Kubrick. And the reason that this falls at number 3 for me is it is a wild departure from the book. Completely different to the book in some aspects, both through visuals and meaning. But as a movie loosely based on that book, this thing is incredible. You can watch this thing 20 times and still spot little nods to things in the background. There is still discussions going 45 years later about the ending of this book and how about the ending of this movie and how ambiguous it ends. Jack Nicholson is on full form psychopath in this. He is he's terrifying. The child actor of Danny does really well, and child actors are quite hard to get right. Shelley Duvall is incredible in this. And okay, in recent times we've heard she went through the hell she went through making this, and that's not fair. But what a performance. Her and Jack Nicholson are amazing in this. The effects are really good considering how old this movie is. The haunting score, the cinematography, it's a fantastic movie, and was my number one Stephen King movie for such a long time because I read the book after I saw the film. In fact, I would go as far as to say that if we got this production value, but on the TV miniseries with, what was her name? Rebecca De Mornay, then that would have been the perfect version because it follows the book much stronger, but there's really dodgy TV CGI in there. The child actor is terrible. Sorry. Even the side characters in this, there's not many, but obviously you've got Scatman Crothers in this, and he's brilliant in this movie. Such a good film. There's a reason most people put this at the top of their list. The only reason I don't have this top is it's a little bit too far away from the source material, whereas my number one is very close to the source material, and we'll discuss something else about that. And this kind of leads me into my number two. So number two, Dr. Sleep from 2019. Now, when they announced this, that they were making it, I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. I don't know about Ewan McGregor playing an older Danny Torrance. I don't know how they're going to bridge this, and I don't know how they're going to link it to The Shining. Has it been too long? And then Mike Flanagan's name was attached to it, and I was instantly excited. This movie, it's borderline my number one Stephen King movie because it is so well made. This movie actually somehow bridges The Shining movie and The Shining book and bridges them together while still holding true to the Doctor Sleep book. It's absolutely wild how Mike Flanagan put this together. Ewan McGregor surprised me in this. He is so good in the role. Rebecca Ferguson, I mean, she is this beautiful woman, Rose the Hat, but she is so dangerous with it. There is a scene involving a young kid, and it is really hard to watch. If you're a parent, it's destroying to watch. But this film is so well acted, so polished, looks so good, so well written to combine all of these worlds. And then there's elements where you see Elliot from E.T. as a grown-up playing a version of Jack Torrance that is strikingly similar to Jack Nicholson's version. And it's kind of jarring the first time you see it, but throughout the movie then you just get used to it. But what's even weirder is the replacement for Shelley Duvall. She nails the mannerisms, the fear. It's bizarre to watch, but in a great way. Both of these actors that play Danny's parents do such a good job of bridging the book and the visuals of the original Stanley Kubrick. We go back to the Overlook at the end of this, sort of this final battle, and it's horrific. There's a lot of strong horror in this, but then there's superpowers kind of in this. Then there's sort of astral projection while sleeping. It sounds batshit crazy. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but Mike Flanagan is an absolute master of what he does. I adore this movie, and it was very, very nearly number one. But there's a single reason why this isn't my number one. So my number one is actually Pet Sematary from 1989. And I know some of you may be like, that film's kind of cheesy. That film is kind of cheesy. Some of the acting is a bit like daytime TV acting. Yes, it is. But to me, it adds to the charm of this movie. Full disclosure, the first time I watched this, I was 9 or 10 years of age. I watched it on Sky TV, I think. There were adverts, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. Rachel! The sister in this was fucking terrifying. The cat was terrifying. I'm not scared of cats. The cat in this scared me. Then you get the horrific thing that kicks it all off with Gage. And that is horrific. There's a scene involving a scalpel and an Achilles tendon that is brutal. And again, one of those scenes you're like, no matter how many times you watch, you're like, that fucking stings looking at it. One of my favourite parts of this movie is Fred Gwynne, Herman Munster himself playing Judd Crandall. And I've reread the book a number of times, and every time I read Judd's lines, I read them in Fred Gwynne's voice in my brain. He was perfect casting for this. he's kind of likable, but there's just this something off creepy factor that comes from him, which comes from the book. They may downplay, in fact, Judd's involvement in the Pet Cemetery sort of tragedies that happen. I just love this movie. The practical effects are really, really good. The sound design is really good and very creepy. There's always this undercurrent. But the reason this is my number one is this movie terrified me as a kid. But it wasn't just Gage. It wasn't just the mum. It wasn't just Rachel. It was everything. Everything about this movie. Victor Pascal. You got Pascal just rotting over time through this movie. But he's, a figment of imagination, or is he? And Miko Hughes is so young in this, but he does really well playing the part. Absolutely. This film is very cheesy in places, but it is so horrific that the cheese is forgivable for everything else that happens in this movie. And then they ruined they tried turning this into a franchise and ruined it. They brought out part 2, which kind of turned it into a comedy horror. I liked it as a kid. As an adult, I think the movie absolutely fucking sucks. Then they did a remake where the movie studio spoilt the hell out of it. They did something very brave and flipped, the death that was going to kick everything off, the horror of it. But they gave it all away in the trailers and in the posters even, and you're like, why would you make that decision? It pissed me off. But the casting was really good for it, and then somehow the film just felt half asleep. Even when I watched the trailers, and I knew it spoiled the movie for me, the movie looked really interesting. And then when I watched it, I was like, no, it just didn't work. Judd was not as creepy in it. Judd was too likable in it. There wasn't like an undercurrent to him. It felt like most people in that movie phoned in the roles. It just didn't work for me. Then they did Pet Sematary Bloodlines, which is a prequel. There's some enjoyable. It's better than the remake. I'll give it that. You got Fox Mulder turning up in it. There's a cool story to it. Original, nothing to do with Stephen King, but it tells the backstory of a young Judd. But it doesn't really fit. It's not the worst of the Pet Sematary follow-ups and remakes and prequels, but it's probably the better of them, but it's still pretty bad. And I think it's meant to be a prequel to the remake as opposed to this original TV show, but it just doesn't work. But the original Pet Sematary 1989 absolutely terrified me. Denise Crosby is great in this. Always loved Denise Crosby from... She was in Star Trek The Next Generation. Dale Midkiff, a lot of people complain about his performance in this movie. I like it. This movie is kind of grainy and cheap looking, but that adds to the grimy, grainy nastiness of this movie because this story is dark. Really, really, really dark. I mean, the book is very, very dark, and the book scared the shit out of me. And there's interviews with Stephen King where he says how he was in a really bad place with alcohol and stuff when he wrote this book. It shows, and I think the best version of it is the 1989 movie. I don't see why this movie gets the hate it does, why people dislike it so much. It's my favourite Stephen King horror movie because... nostalgia for one. It is genuinely the scariest story, the scariest movie that I'd ever seen with Stephen King for me. Now, bearing in mind, I was the kid that was scared of the dark half. I was the kid that was scared of most of the Creep Show. I was never scared of... I don't think I was ever proper scared of Tim Curry's Pennywise, though. I don't think I was one of those kids that was terrified by it. I know a lot of people were, but I wasn't. I was like, oh, there's some scary elements, but it's a clown. But for me, Pet Sematary is hands down the scariest story, the best adaptation of the story, and it's like a piece of time for me. This may actually be my wife's favourite movie as well. But then it'll depend on the day of the week, because my wife also absolutely adores Annie Wilkes, so... I think my wife's probably more of a Stephen King fan than I am. So please let me know what your favourite Stephen King horror movie is down in the comment section down below. There's no wrong answers. You can love whatever you want. Maybe with the exception of Firestarter. Now, I know I didn't include Carrie in this, but Carrie didn't scare me as a kid. Carrie is a great movie. I enjoy Carrie. Cujo, same thing. Loved it, but it didn't scare me. It's an uncomfortable watch, but it's not scary. I don't hate any of those movies. Dead Zone, there's a lot of movies that should have been in this, and they're not. Dreamcatcher, I adore Dreamcatcher, but is it horror? I mean, it's an alien poo. I don't know. But yeah, let me know what your favourites are in the comment section down below. No wrong answers. It's personal taste. This is my personal list. Much love to you all. Beardo out.